Chapter 17, Uncle. When they pulled into the fairgrounds, they could hear music and see the Ferris wheel turning in the sky. They could smell the dust of the racetrack where the sprinkling car had moistened it. They could smell hamburgers frying in the balloons aloft. They could hear sheep battling their pens. An enormous voice over the loudspeaker said, "Attention, please. Will the owner of a Pontiac car, license number H2439, please move your car away from the fireworks shed?" "Can I have some money?" asked Fern. "Can I too?" asked Avery. "I want to win a doll by spinning a wheel, and it'll stop at the right number," said Fern. "I'm going to steer a jet plane and make it bump into another one." "Can I have a balloon?" asked Fern. "Can I have a frozen custard and a cheeseburger and some raspberry soda pop?" asked Avery. "You children be quiet until we get this pig unloaded," said Mrs. Arable. "Let's let the children go off by themselves," suggested Mr. Arable. "The fair only comes once a year." Mr. Arable gave Fern 2 quarters and 2 dimes. He gave Avery 5 dimes and 4 nickels. "Now run along," he said, "and remember, the money has to last all day. Don't spend it in the first few minutes, and be back here at the truck at noontime so we can all have lunch together. And don't eat a lot of stuff that's going to make you sick to your stomachs. Hey, and if you go on those swings," said Mr. Arable, "you hang on tight, and you hang on very tight. You hear me? Don't get lost," said Mrs. Zuckerman. "Don't get dirty. Don't get overheated," said their mother. "Watch out for pickpockets," cautioned their father. "And don't cross the racetrack when the horses are coming," cried Mrs. Zuckerman. The children grabbed each other by the hand and danced off in the direction of the merry-go-round toward the wonderful music and the wonderful adventure and the wonderful excitement into the wonderful midway where there would be no parents to guard them and guide them, and they could be happy and free to do what they pleased. Mrs. Arabelle stood quietly and watched them go. Then she sighed and she blew her nose. "Do you really think it's all right?" she asked. "Well, they got to grow up sometime," said Mr. Arable, "and the fair's a good place to start, I guess." While Wilbur was being unloaded and taken out of his crate into the new pig pen, crowds gathered to watch. They started to sign Zuckerman's farm, or they stared at the sign, "Zuckerman's Famous Pig." Wilbur stared back and tried to look extra good. He was pleased with his new home. The pen was grassy, and there was shade from the sun, and there was a shed and roof. Charlotte watched her chance scramble out of the crate and climb to the post under the side of the roof. Nobody noticed her. Templeton, not wishing to come out in broad daylight, stayed quietly under the straw in the bottom of the crate. Mr. Zuckerman poured some skim milk into Wilbur's trough, pitched some clean straw into his pig pen, and then he and Mr. Zuckerman and the Arables walked towards the cattle barn at the purebred cows to look at all the sights. Mr. Zuckerman particularly wanted to look at tractors. Mrs. Zuckerman wanted to see a deep freeze. Lurvy wandered off by himself, hoping to meet friends and have some fun in the midway. That's the midway. As soon as the people were gone, Charlotte spoke to Wilbur. "It's a good thing that you can't see what I see," she said. "What do you see?" asked Wilbur. "There's a pig in the next pen, and he's enormous. I'm afraid that he's much bigger than you are." "Maybe he's older than I am, and he's had more time to grow," suggested Wilbur. Tears began to come to his eyes. "I'm going to drop down and have a closer look," Charlotte said. Then she crawled along the beam and was directly over the next pig pen. She let herself down on a dragline until she hung right in front of the pig's snout. "May I have your name?" she asked politely. The pig stared at her. "No name," he said in a big, hearty voice. "Just call me Uncle." "Very well, Uncle," replied Charlotte. "What's the date of your birth? Are you a spring pig?" "Sure, I'm a spring pig," replied Uncle. "What do you think I was? A spring chicken?" "That's a good one, eh, sister?" "Mildly funny," said Charlotte. "I've heard funnier ones, though. Glad to have met you. Now I must be going." She ascended slowly and returned to Wilbur's pen. "He claims he's a spring pig," reported Charlotte, "and perhaps he is. One thing for certain, he's the most unattractive personality. He's too familiar, too noisy. He cracks weak jokes, and he's nowhere as clean as you are, nor as pleasant. I took a dislike to him in our brief interview. He's going to be a hard pig to beat, though, Wilbur, on account of his size and weight, but with me helping you, it can be done." "When are you going to spin a web?" asked Wilbur. "This afternoon, late. If I'm not too tired, said Charlotte. And there's Uncle. The least things tire me these days. I don't seem to have energy like I once had. My age, I guess. Wilbur looked at his friend. She looked rather swollen and seemed lifeless. I'm awfully sorry to hear that you're feeling so bad, Charlotte, he said. Perhaps if you spin a web and can catch a couple flies, you'll feel better. Perhaps, she said wearily, but I feel at the end of a long day. Clinging upside down to the ceiling, she settled in for a nap, leaving Wilbur very much worried. All morning, people wandered past Wilbur's pen. Dozens and dozens of strangers stopped to stare at him and admire his silky white coat and his curly tail, his kind and radiant expression. Then they would move on to the next pen where the big pig laid. Wilbur heard several people making favorable remarks about Uncle's great size. He couldn't help overhearing these remarks, and he couldn't help worrying. And now, with Charlotte not feeling well, he thought, oh dear. All morning, Templeton slept quietly under the straw. The day grew fiercely hot. At noon, the Zuckermans and the Arabelles returned to the pig pen. Then a few minutes later, Fern and Avery showed up. Fern had a monkey doll in her arms and was eating a Cracker Jack. Avery had a balloon tied to his ear and was chewing a candied apple. The children were hot and dirty. Isn't it hot? Said Mrs. Zuckerman. It's terribly hot, said Mrs. Arable, fanning herself with an advertisement of a deep freeze. One by one, they climbed into the truck and opened lunch boxes. The sun beat down on everything. Nobody seemed hungry. When are the judges going to decide about Wilbur? Asked Mrs. Zuckerman. Not till tomorrow, said Mr. Zuckerman. Lurvy appeared carrying an Indian blanket that he'd won. That's just what we need, said Avery. A blanket. Of course it is, replied Lurvy, and he spread the blanket across the sideboards of the truck so that it was a little tent. The children sat in the shade under the blanket and felt better. After lunch, they all stretched out and fell asleep.